Hey guys, picture this. You're standing in a freezing studio wearing a corset laced so tight, your ribs feel like they're trying to escape through your spine. Your face is caked in lead-based makeup that smells like a painter's workshop mixed with old coins. You haven't eaten since yesterday because the photographer said your waist looked too thick. Meanwhile, the photographer himself is shouting at you to hold perfectly still for the next 40 minutes, while he fiddles with his camera equipment. One tiny twitch and you'll ruin the shot, which means starting all over again. Your feet are numb in boots 2 sizes too small because tiny feet were the standard of beauty. And that's just the first hour of your day as a Victorian fashion model. If you're enjoying this glimpse into the past, give this video a like and subscribe for more historical deep dives. I'm genuinely curious to know where you're watching from, so tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and what time it is for you right now. So let's step into the world of a Victorian fashion model and find out exactly why you wouldn't last a single day in those uncomfortable dresses. Let's start with the most basic part of your job, which is getting dressed, except it's not basic at all. Getting dressed as a Victorian fashion model takes approximately 2 hours, requires at least one other person, and feels like being assembled rather than clothed. You can't just throw on an outfit and head out the door. Every single garment has buttons, hooks, laces or ties that you physically cannot reach yourself. The woman who helps you dress arrives at dawn, and she's not particularly gentle about it either. She's been doing this since before sunrise, and you're her 4th client of the morning. She's tired, her hands are cold, and she yanks those laces like she's trying to start a stubborn lawnmower. First comes the chemise, which is the only layer that actually touches your skin. It's made of linen that feels scratchy and rough, like someone wove it from old rope. Then come the drawers, which are essentially loose trousers that tie at the waist and don't connect in the middle. Yes, really. Then the corset. This isn't some cute fashion accessory you wear over your clothes for aesthetics. This is a scaffolding system made of whalebone and steel that restructures your entire torso. The woman helping you dress tells you to hold onto the bedpost and breathe out. Then she pulls. Your ribcage compresses. Your internal organs shift upward and downward, looking for somewhere to go. Your waist shrinks from a normal human size to something that looks like you've been pinched in the middle by a giant's fingers. You can't breathe properly anymore. You can only take shallow little sips of air from the top of your lungs. Bending at the waist is physically impossible. If you drop something on the floor, it's staying there unless someone else picks it up for you. Sitting down requires careful positioning and a bit of luck. You lower yourself onto chairs like you're trying to land a small aircraft, hoping you've judged the angle correctly. And this corset doesn't come off until bedtime. You'll wear it for the next 16 hours straight, through every photo shoot, every fitting, every meal if you're brave enough to attempt eating, and every moment in between. After the corset comes the corset cover, which is meant to protect your expensive outer garments from the sweat that's already forming under all these layers. Then come the petticoats. Not one petticoat, not 2, at least 4 or 5 petticoats, each one made of heavy fabric with layers of ruffles and flounces. Each petticoat ties separately at your waist, which is now so compressed that finding space for all these waistbands becomes an engineering challenge. The weight of all these petticoats pulls on your hips and lower back. By the time you're done, you're carrying around an extra 15 pounds of fabric around your legs. Walking feels like wading through waist-deep water, except the water is made of linen and cotton, and it's incredibly hot. Then comes the bustle, if it's fashionable that season, which is a wire or padded frame that ties around your waist and sticks out behind you like a shelf. It makes your bottom look enormous, which is apparently attractive. It also means you can't lean back against anything. Chairs become perching spots rather than resting places. If you try to sit back normally, the bustle frame either stabs you in the lower back or flips up behind you like a faulty window blind, sending your skirts up over your head. There's an art to sitting with a bustle, and it involves sitting forward on the edge of the chair with perfect posture for hours on end. Your lower back starts aching within minutes. Now comes the actual dress. This isn't a single piece you pull over your head. It's a bodice and a skirt, both requiring assistance. The bodice has approximately 40 tiny buttons up the back, each one the size of a pea. The woman helping you dress fastens each one with her cold fingers while you stand there trying not to shiver. The fabric is stiff and heavy, often made of silk or velvet or wool depending on the season and what the photographer wants. The sleeves are tight from shoulder to wrist, cutting into your arms like enthusiastic bandages. The collar comes up high on your neck, scratching at your throat and making you feel like you're being gently strangled by expensive fabric. The skirt attaches separately and weighs approximately the same as a medium-sized dog. It's so long it drags on the floor behind you, collecting every bit of dust, mud and street debris you encounter throughout the day. The hem will be black with grime by lunchtime. You'll tread on it yourself multiple times, nearly tripping yourself up. Other people will step on it accidentally, jerking you backwards mid-stride like someone's yanked your emergency brake. And if it rains, which it does frequently, the hem soaks up water like a decorative sponge, adding another several pounds to your ensemble and leaving a wet trail behind you wherever you walk. Then come the accessories, because apparently you're not suffering enough yet. Gloves made of kid leather so thin and delicate you can barely grip anything. A belt cinched tight around your already compressed waist. A collar or brooch at your throat. Sometimes a hat pinned onto your elaborately styled hair with pins that stab into your scalp. The hat itself might be decorated with ribbons, flowers, feathers, or even entire stuffed birds, adding top heaviness to your already precarious situation. Your neck muscles strain to hold your head upright under all that decoration. Finally, the boots. Victorian boots are made of leather stiff enough to build furniture from. They lace up to mid-calf with approximately 50 eyelets each. The woman helping you dress pulls these laces tight enough to cut off circulation. Your feet are compressed into narrow, pointed toes that crush all your toes together like they're huddling for warmth. The heels are small but unstable, making you wobble on uneven surfaces. Breaking in new boots takes weeks and leaves your feet covered in blisters and sore spots. Most models simply endure the discomfort of too tight boots because stretched out boots look sloppy, and looking sloppy means you don't get hired again. By the time you're fully dressed, you're exhausted, and you haven't even left the dressing room yet. You're layered in approximately 20 pounds of fabric and scaffolding. You're compressed, restricted and balanced precariously on uncomfortable footwear. Moving requires thought and planning. Breathing requires effort, and your actual job hasn't even started yet. This is just the preparation phase, the getting ready part that modern people accomplish in 15 minutes while checking their phones. For you, it's been 2 hours of standing still while being assembled like a complicated piece of furniture, and now you're ready to begin your actual workday, which will involve standing even more still for even longer periods, while photographers fuss with their equipment and bark instructions at you. Now you're ready for your first photo shoot of the day, which sounds glamorous until you realize what Victorian photography actually involves. This isn't someone with a phone snapping 50 shots in 10 seconds and picking the best one. This is a complicated chemical and optical process that takes forever and requires you to stay absolutely motionless for minutes at a time. Not almost motionless, not mostly still, completely frozen like a statue, barely even breathing, while the camera does its work. The photography studio is freezing cold regardless of the season. The photographer insists on keeping it cool because the chemicals he uses are sensitive to heat. Never mind that you're sensitive to cold and wearing a dress with bare shoulders, because that's what's fashionable. Your skin prickles with goosebumps immediately. Your muscles tense up trying to generate warmth, which makes holding still even more difficult. Your nose starts to run, but you can't sniffle too loudly or wipe it, because you're not allowed to move your head or lift your hands from their carefully positioned placement. The photographer positions you exactly where he wants you, adjusting your posture like you're a mannequin. He lifts your chin half an inch. He turns your shoulders slightly to the left. He arranges your hands just so, with fingers gently curved in a way that feels completely unnatural and makes your hand muscles cramp almost immediately. He positions your feet at an angle that looks elegant but feels unstable, like you're constantly on the verge of tipping over. Then he steps back, looks through his camera, decides something's not quite right, and comes back to adjust you again. This happens 6 or 7 times before he's satisfied. Meanwhile, you're standing there holding whatever position he's left you in, trying not to let your muscles shake from fatigue. That elegant hand position he arranged. Your fingers are starting to go numb from holding them curved like that. That graceful tilt of your head. Your neck muscles are screaming. That sophisticated angle of your feet. Your ankles are wobbling and you're genuinely worried you might topple over like a badly balanced broom. Finally, the photographer is ready. He ducks under the black cloth behind his camera and tells you to hold perfectly still. Then he removes the lens cap and the exposure begins. You have to hold your exact position without moving a single muscle for anywhere from 30 seconds to 3 full minutes, depending on the lighting conditions. 3 minutes doesn't sound that long until you're living through it, while trying not to blink, breathe noticeably, or let your trembling muscles give away how uncomfortable you are. Your nose itches desperately. Of course it does. It never itches any other time, but the moment you're forbidden from moving, your nose develops the most intense itch you've ever experienced. It feels like a fly is crawling across your nostril. You can't scratch it. You can't even wrinkle your nose. You have to let it itch while maintaining a serene, pleasant expression. Your eyes start to water from the effort of not blinking. Victorian photographs always show people looking slightly grim and serious, and that's not because Victorians were miserable. It's because smiling naturally for 3 consecutive minutes is physically impossible. Your face muscles start to shake. That pleasant expression becomes a rigid grimace. Your back aches from holding perfect posture. Your compressed waist makes every breath a challenge. Your feet are going numb in those tight boots. Your arm, which is positioned in an elegant drape across your lap, feels like it's about to fall off. Muscle tremors start in your shoulder and threaten to travel down to your hand. You fight to keep still, but your body really wants to shift position, stretch, or at least take a proper breath. Finally, the photographer replaces the lens cap and emerges from under his black cloth. You can move. You let out a huge breath, shift your weight, shake out your trembling hand. But your relief lasts about 30 seconds because the photographer wants another shot from a different angle. Time to do this all over again. The second pose is even worse than the first. This time he wants you standing with one hand resting on a decorative column prop, while your other hand holds a fan. The fan is heavier than it looks, and holding it at the precise angle he wants makes your wrist ache. The column is exactly the wrong height, so resting your hand on it requires bending your arm at an awkward angle that makes your shoulder protest. Your feet are positioned in a way that puts all your weight on one leg. Within seconds, that leg starts to shake. Again, you hold perfectly still for minutes that feel like hours. Your weighted leg trembles, your wrist screams, your shoulder burns. That itch migrates from your nose to your ear, then to your neck, then back to your nose again, like it's touring your face looking for the most inconvenient spot. A drop of moisture runs down your back under all those layers, tickling as it goes. You can't shift, can't scratch, can't react. You're a living statue, and statues don't get to be comfortable. The photographer takes his time checking his chemicals and preparing the next exposure. You're still frozen in position because he hasn't told you to relax. Your leg is properly shaking now, visible tremors that you're worried will blur the photograph. Finally, he notices and tells you to take a brief rest. You immediately shift your weight and your leg nearly buckles beneath you. The muscles have been locked in position for so long they've forgotten how to work properly. You stamp your foot trying to get feeling back into it, while the photographer fusses with his equipment. Between shots, the photographer's assistant comes over to adjust your appearance. Your hair has to be exactly right. Your collar has to sit perfectly flat. The drape of your skirt needs careful arrangement. This assistant touches you without warning, tugging at your bodice, smoothing your sleeves, repositioning accessories. You're not a person to him. You're a display item that needs to look correct. He pulls a pin from your hair and jabs it back in at a better angle, stabbing your scalp in the process. You flinch, but he doesn't apologize or even seem to notice. He's already moving on to adjust the lace at your throat, pulling it so tight you feel like you're being choked by a decorative doily. The studio smells strongly of chemicals. The photographer uses substances with sharp, acrid odors that catch in your throat and make your eyes water even more than they already are. There's a tang of metal and vinegar in the air, mixed with other scents you can't identify, but definitely don't enjoy. Breathing shallowly through your mouth helps, but then your mouth gets dry and you get thirsty, which becomes another discomfort to add to your growing collection. After an hour in the studio, you've completed perhaps 4 or 5 photographs. Each one required several minutes of perfect stillness, plus all the preparation and adjustment time in between. Your muscles are exhausted from the sustained effort of holding unnatural poses. Your feet throb in those tight boots. Your compressed waist has given you a headache from the restricted breathing, and you're only getting started. You have at least 3 more hours of this ahead of you today, possibly with costume changes in between that require going through the entire dressing process again with different garments. There's no lunch break scheduled. Fashion models are expected to maintain tiny waists, and the easiest way to maintain a tiny waist is to not put food in it. You'll get something to eat eventually, but not until the photographer is finished with you, and he works on his schedule, not yours. Your stomach is already making angry noises, but there's nothing you can do about it except ignore the gnawing sensation of hunger and hope. Your stomach doesn't growl loudly enough to be heard across the studio during one of these eternal silent poses. Eventually you finish at the photography studio and head to your next appointment, which is a fitting at a dressmaker's shop. This might sound more pleasant than standing motionless for hours, but it absolutely isn't. At a fitting, you're essentially a living mannequin while dressmakers pin, tuck, adjust, and occasionally stab you with their pins as they perfect the fit of garments on your body. Getting to the dressmaker's shop is its own challenge. You can't simply walk there like a normal person. Victorian streets are absolutely disgusting. There are piles of horse droppings everywhere, some fresh and steaming, others old and dried, but still very much present. Horses are the main form of transportation, and horses produce approximately 15 pounds of dung per day. Multiply that by thousands of horses, and you get streets that are essentially obstacle courses of manure. You have to watch every step carefully, trying to navigate between the piles while wearing a skirt so long it drags on the ground behind you. Inevitably, your hem picks up some of the mess. By the time you arrive at the dressmaker's, the bottom 6 inches of your expensive dress are stained with brown smears and smell like a stable. The streets aren't just covered in horse deposits. There's mud everywhere, thick and sticky, mixed with things you don't want to think about too closely. When it rains, which happens frequently, the streets become rivers of brown sludge that splash up onto your skirts when carriages roll past. There are no proper pavements in many areas, just dirt paths that turn into soup in wet weather. Your boots, which were uncomfortably tight when clean, become uncomfortably tight and soggy when wet. The leather doesn't breathe. Your feet essentially marinate inside your boots, getting clammier and more wrinkled with each squelching step. You finally reach the dressmaker's shop and climb the narrow stairs to the fitting room. The shop smells like fabric, dye, and the sweat of the many women who've stood in this same spot for their own fittings. The room is small and crowded with bolts of cloth, half-finished garments, and pins scattered on every surface. The dressmaker greets you cheerfully and immediately starts undressing you. There's no privacy here. The dressmaker and her assistants strip you down to your undergarments without ceremony, removing your outer layers so they can fit you properly for the new dress they're making. Standing in your chemise and corset in a room with 3 strangers should feel awkward, but you're too uncomfortable to care much about modesty. Your corset has been compressing your organs for 6 hours now, and the discomfort has progressed from acute to a dull, constant ache. Your ribs hurt, your back hurts, your stomach hurts in a hollow, empty way that's partly hunger and partly the physical compression of your digestive system. The dressmaker brings out the dress she's working on. It's only partially constructed, with loose threads hanging everywhere and pins marking where seams will eventually be. She drops it over your head and starts pinning it directly on your body. She works quickly, her fingers flying as she tucks fabric here and pulls it tight there, stabbing pins through multiple layers to hold everything in place. Sometimes the pins go through to your undergarments. Sometimes they scratch your skin. Once in a while, she accidentally stabs you properly and you flinch, but she just says sorry and keeps working. Getting stabbed is apparently an accepted occupational hazard of being a fitting model. She circles you like a predator, tugging at the fabric, pinning aggressively, muttering to herself about the drape of the sleeve or the fall of the skirt. She's not trying to hurt you, but she also doesn't particularly care about your comfort. The dress is what matters. You're just the frame it hangs on. She pulls the bodice tighter, compressing you even more than the corset already has. You couldn't take a full breath if your life depended on it. She pins the waist so snugly that you can feel your pulse throbbing against the constriction. You have to stand perfectly still during all this, but unlike the photography studio where you could at least zone out slightly, here you have to remain alert and responsive. The dressmaker keeps asking you to turn, to lift your arms, to step up onto a small platform, to turn again. Your exhausted leg muscles protest every movement. Your feet, which have been crammed into tight boots for 7 hours now, are completely numb except for the spots where blisters are forming. Those spots are very much not numb. The fitting room is stuffy and warm. There's no ventilation to speak of. The air is thick with the smell of fabric sizing and human bodies. The dressmaker's assistants are working at a table in the corner, sewing by lamplight, and their presence adds more body heat to the already warm room. You're wearing multiple layers of heavy fabric and standing under direct lamplight, so the dressmaker can see what she's doing. Sweat trickles down your back, soaking into your chemise. More moisture collects under your arms and beneath your compressed chest. Your face feels flushed and damp, but you can't wipe it, because your arms are currently being positioned by an assistant. The dressmaker decides the sleeves need to be completely restructured. She pulls out all the pins holding them on, removes the sleeves entirely, and starts again from scratch. This adds another 20 minutes to your fitting. You continue standing there, arms held out to the sides like a scarecrow, while she pins and repins the sleeve fabric. Your shoulders burn from holding your arms up. When she finally allows you to lower them, your muscles are so fatigued they shake. After the sleeves come adjustments to the skirt. The dressmaker isn't happy with how it hangs. She and her 2 assistants spend 15 minutes crawling around on the floor at your feet, pinning and repinning the hem while you stand motionless on the platform above them. You're so tired you could fall asleep standing up. Your knees keep trying to lock, which makes them ache even more. You shift your weight slightly from one foot to the other, trying to find any position that hurts less. There isn't one. Just when you think the fitting must be nearly over, the dressmaker remembers she needs to check the neckline. She pulls the bodice this way and that, yanking it up, then down, then up again, trying to get the collar to sit exactly right against your throat. Each yank jerks your whole body. You feel like a dog being fitted for a collar by someone who doesn't particularly care if the collar is comfortable as long as it looks right. Finally, after 90 minutes of standing, being stabbed, being yanked around, and being examined from every angle, the dressmaker declares the fitting complete. Her assistants help remove the dress, carefully pulling it off over your head while trying not to disturb all those pins. You're left standing there in your undergarments again, dizzy with relief that it's over and slightly dizzy from lack of food and air. But you're not done yet. The dressmaker has another dress that needs fitting. This one is for a different client, but she needs to check the proportions on a live body before she proceeds with construction. You're approximately the right size, so you'll do. On goes the second dress, and the whole process starts again. More standing, more pinning, more turning and posing and holding your arms at uncomfortable angles. Your body is so tired, it's stopped sending specific complaint messages. Everything just hurts in a general, whole-body way. When the second fitting finally ends, you get dressed in your street clothes again with help from one of the assistants. Your own dress, which felt restrictive and uncomfortable this morning, now feels almost comfortable by comparison to the torture devices you've been modelling. That's how low your standards have fallen. A dress that compresses your organs and weighs 15 pounds feels comfortable because at least nobody's stabbing you with pins while you wear it. Let's talk about what you eat as a Victorian fashion model, or more accurately, what you don't eat. The fashionable silhouette requires a waist so tiny it looks like you're being pinched by invisible hands. Achieving that silhouette is partly about the corset doing its work, but it's also about simply having less body to compress in the first place. That means eating as little as possible while still maintaining enough energy to stand for hours and look alive enough to photograph well. Breakfast, if you have it at all, might be tea and a single piece of dry toast. Not toast with butter. Butter has fat, and fat makes you bigger. Just plain toast that tastes like slightly burnt paper and has approximately the same texture. You chew this joyless square of browned bread while your stomach growls in protest, wondering why you're bothering to feed it at all if this is the best you can offer. The tea is better. At least it's warm and has some flavour, even if it's just bitter and hot. Some models skip breakfast entirely, believing that an empty stomach makes the waist look smaller. They're not wrong exactly, but they're also condemning themselves to a morning of increasing dizziness and exhaustion. You can't think clearly when you're hungry. Your concentration wanders, your patience disappears. Everything irritates you more than it should because your body is running on fumes and desperately wants you to put some fuel in the tank. Lunch usually doesn't happen. You're too busy being photographed or fitted or travelling between appointments to stop for a meal. Even if you had time, eating a full lunch would make your stomach expand slightly, which would make your corset even more uncomfortable than it already is. The pressure of food pressing against compressed organs creates a special kind of misery. So you skip lunch and try to ignore the gnawing emptiness that's taken up residence in your middle. By mid-afternoon, you're shaky and weak. Your hands tremble slightly when you hold them out. Your vision gets a bit sparkly around the edges if you stand up too quickly. You're running on nothing but tea and that single piece of toast from many hours ago. Your body is burning through whatever reserves it has, and those reserves are not impressive because you've been eating like this for months or years, trying to maintain that fashionable figure. When you finally get home in the evening, you're allowed to eat dinner. But dinner for a fashion model isn't the hearty meal a normal person might enjoy. It's a small portion of plain food, carefully calculated to provide just enough nutrition to keep you alive without adding any noticeable bulk to your frame. Perhaps some boiled fish, which tastes like the sea decided to become boring. Perhaps some plain vegetables boiled until they're soft and grey and have given up all pretense of having flavour. Perhaps a small potato, though potatoes are suspect because they're filling, and you might eat less of the expensive fish if you fill up on cheap potato. Everything is prepared without sauce, without butter, without salt or seasoning, beyond perhaps a grinding of black pepper if you're lucky. The food isn't meant to be enjoyable, it's meant to be fuel, delivered in the smallest quantity possible. You eat slowly, trying to make the small portions last, trying to trick your stomach into feeling satisfied with this meager offering. It doesn't work. Your stomach knows it's being cheated, but you eat what you're given and try not to think about the meat pies you pass on the street that smell like heaven, or the fresh bread in bakery windows that makes your mouth water. Some models try various tricks to suppress their appetite. Vinegar is popular. Drinking vinegar is supposed to reduce hunger and help shrink the waistline. Whether this is actually true is questionable, but plenty of women drink it anyway, grimacing at the sour bite as they swallow. Others drink excessive amounts of tea, trying to fill their stomachs with liquid to reduce the hunger pangs. This works slightly, but it also means you need to use the chamber pot frequently, which is its own hassle when you're wearing layers of complicated clothing. The constant hunger becomes your normal state. You stop noticing it as much after a while, the same way you stop noticing a constant background noise. But it's always there, a hollow ache that never quite goes away. It makes you irritable and tired. It makes you cold because your body doesn't have enough fuel to generate proper heat. It makes you weak and shaky by the end of long days. But it keeps your waist fashionably small, and that's what matters in this profession. Some women take it even further and use various substances to suppress appetite entirely. There are patent medicines available that promise to reduce hunger and increase energy. These medicines often contain things that definitely work to reduce appetite, mainly because they're essentially poison in small doses. Women take them anyway, desperate to maintain the right figure, and deal with the side effects of racing hearts, jittery hands, and a general feeling of unease that sits under everything else they're feeling. The lack of proper nutrition shows on your body in ways beyond just being thin. Your skin gets dull and dry because you're not eating enough fat to keep it supple. Your hair becomes brittle and breaks easily. Your nails are thin and peel in layers. You're cold all the time because your body doesn't have enough fuel to maintain a proper temperature. You bruise easily, great purple marks blooming on your skin from the slightest bump because your body doesn't have the resources to maintain healthy blood vessels. You're tired constantly, not just end of the day tired, deep, bone tired, the kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fully fix, because your body is simply running on insufficient fuel all the time. Getting out of bed in the morning is a struggle. Climbing stairs leaves you breathless. The physical demands of your job become harder and harder to meet, because you're trying to do physical work, while essentially starving yourself. And yet you keep doing it because this is the job. This is what's required. Models who eat normally and maintain healthy body weight don't get hired because they don't fit into the fashionable clothes properly. The clients want to see their garments displayed on bodies that match the fashionable ideal, and the fashionable ideal is thin to the point of gauntness. So you eat your sad little meals, drink your vinegar, ignore your growling stomach, and try not to faint during long photo shoots. The worst part is how food starts to occupy your thoughts constantly. When you're not actively working, you're thinking about food. Not even fancy food, just food. Bread, cheese, an apple, a proper portion of roasted meat. Things that normal people eat without thinking about them become objects of intense longing. You walk past restaurants and the smells that waft out make you genuinely lightheaded with want. You watch other people eating and feel a surge of envy so strong it's almost anger. Social situations involving food become torture. If you're invited to a dinner party, you have to attend and watch other people eat multiple courses of delicious food while you pick at tiny portions and push food around your plate to make it look like you're eating more than you are. People comment on how little you eat. They encourage you to have more. They don't understand that for you, eating more means risking your livelihood. Every mouthful that goes beyond your strict limit is a potential threat to your fashionably compressed figure. Some models develop strange relationships with food, hoarding it in their rooms even though they don't let themselves eat it. Just having it nearby provides some psychological comfort. Others go the opposite direction and avoid food entirely, not keeping any in their lodgings because the temptation is too strong. They'd rather feel the absence of food than feel the presence of food they can't allow themselves to eat. Now let's discuss where you live, because housing for a Victorian fashion model is not the comfortable modern flat you might imagine. Unless you're one of the tiny handful of extremely successful models, you're renting a single room in a boarding house, not a flat, not even a bed-sitting room. Just one room that serves as your bedroom, dressing room, living space, and dining area, all in one. The boarding house is located in a part of town that's affordable, which means it's not a part of town anyone would choose to live in if they had other options. The street outside is narrow and perpetually dim because the tall buildings block most of the sunlight. The noise is constant, other residents coming and going at all hours, neighbours arguing through thin walls, street vendors shouting about their wares, carriages clattering past on the cobblestones, dogs barking, children shrieking. Someone somewhere is always making noise, and sound carries through these old buildings like they're designed to amplify every possible disturbance. Your room is on the 4th floor, which means climbing 4 flights of narrow, steep stairs every time you come home. These stairs are worn smooth in the middle from decades of feet trudging up and down them. They're dark because there are no windows in the stairwell, and the landlady is too cheap to keep lamps burning during the day. You climb in near darkness, one hand on the wall to steady yourself, counting the flights so you know when you've reached your floor. After a full day of work, these stairs feel like a mountain. Your legs are already exhausted from standing for hours. Your feet are battered and sore. Climbing 4 flights in tight boots while wearing 15 pounds of fabric makes you breathless and dizzy by the time you reach your door. The room itself is small, perhaps 10 feet by 12 feet. There's a narrow bed, a washstand, a small table with 1 chair, and a wardrobe that doesn't close properly because the door has warped over the years. That's all the furniture there is or could be, because that's all the furniture that fits. The ceiling slopes on one side because you're near the top of the building, so you can only stand upright in part of the room. The walls are thin enough that you can hear your neighbour coughing, snoring, and occasionally talking to herself. The window is tiny and looks out onto a brick wall 3 feet away. The building next door is so close you could reach out and touch it if the window opened more than a few inches, which it doesn't, because it's stuck from years of paint build-up, so you get very little fresh air and even less light. Even at noon on a sunny day, your room is dim. You have to light a candle to see properly for most of the day, and candles cost money, so you often just sit in dimness and save the candles for when you absolutely must have light. The room is cold in winter and stifling in summer. There's a small fireplace, but coal is expensive, so you only light fires when absolutely necessary. In winter, you go to bed wearing all your clothes, piling every blanket you own on top of yourself, and still wake up shivering. You can see your breath in the air when you wake up. The water in the wash basin has a thin skin of ice on top. Getting out of bed requires genuine courage, because it means leaving the small cocoon of warmth you've created and exposing yourself to air that feels like it's come directly from some frozen wasteland. In summer, the room becomes an oven. Heat rises, and you're on the 4th floor, so all the heat from the entire building collects in your space. The stuck window means no cross breeze. The air is thick and still and hot. You lie on top of your covers at night, wearing as little as decency allows, sweating into your sheets. Sleep is nearly impossible. You drift in and out of consciousness, sticky and miserable, occasionally getting up to splash tepid water from your wash basin onto your face and neck. The water warms to room temperature within hours of being poured, so it provides almost no relief. The washstand in your room holds a large ceramic basin and a pitcher of water. This is your entire washing facility. There's no bathroom in your room. There's no bathroom on your floor. There's one shared privy in the backyard that services all 20 residents of the boarding house. Getting to this privy requires going down all 4 flights of stairs, through the back door and across the yard to a small wooden structure that smells exactly as bad as you'd imagine a toilet shared by 20 people would smell. During the day, this is merely inconvenient. At night, it's worse. The stairwell is completely dark. The yard is unlit. You have to carry a candle with you, shielding it from drafts with your hand, carefully navigating the dark stairs while trying not to trip and kill yourself. In winter, it means putting on boots and a coat just to relieve yourself, then trudging through cold or rain or both to reach the privy. Many residents keep chamber pots in their rooms for nighttime use rather than make this journey. But then you have to empty the chamber pot in the morning, which means carrying it down those 4 flights of stairs, hoping you don't meet anyone on the way, and emptying it into the privy while trying not to breathe through your nose. Washing yourself is a challenge in this environment. There's no running water. If you want water for washing, you have to carry it up 4 flights of stairs from the pump in the yard. The pitcher on your washstand holds perhaps 2 gallons, enough for basic washing but not enough for a proper bath. You stand at your washstand and wash yourself in sections, using a cloth and a bar of cheap soap that doesn't lather well. The water is cold unless you've paid extra to have hot water brought up, which you rarely do because it's expensive. A proper bath requires using the communal bathroom on the ground floor, which you're allowed to book once a week if you pay an additional fee to the landlady. The bathroom contains a large tin tub that every resident uses. The landlady's helper fills it with hot water carried in buckets from the kitchen. You get exactly 1 tub full. No more hot water is available once you've used your allocation. You have perhaps 30 minutes to wash before the next person's appointed time. The tub is never entirely clean. You can see the ring of scum left by previous bathers around the sides. You lower yourself into water that other people have bathed in recently, trying not to think about it too much, just grateful to be submerged in warm water for a short while. You wash quickly and efficiently, knowing your time is limited. The water cools rapidly. By the time you're done, it's barely lukewarm, and you're ready to get out anyway. Back in your room, you dress yourself as much as you can without assistance. Some garments you simply can't fasten alone. The buttons up the back of your bodice are unreachable. You either leave them undone if you're staying in for the evening, or you go knock on a neighbour's door and ask for help. There's a woman 2 doors down who's usually willing to help with buttons in exchange for you helping her with her own fastenings. It's an informal arrangement, born of necessity. Your wardrobe contains your work clothes, each piece carefully maintained because you can't afford to replace them often. You brush your dresses regularly to remove dust and dirt. You sponge out stains when they appear. You repair small rips and tears yourself by candlelight, squinting at your stitches. When garments become too worn or damaged to repair, you sell them second-hand and buy other second-hand replacements, a constant cycle of worn clothing moving between people who can't afford new. The room smells like old fabric, candle wax, the lingering scent of whatever you last ate, and the general mustiness of a building that's old and damp and houses too many people in too little space. You stop noticing the smell after a while. It just becomes the smell of home, unpleasant but familiar. Let's move on to the topic of your health as a Victorian fashion model, which deteriorates steadily the longer you work in this profession. The combination of tight lacing, poor nutrition, long hours of standing, and general stress creates a collection of medical problems that would horrify a modern doctor. The corset is slowly rearranging your internal organs. This isn't an exaggeration or a joke. When you compress your waist by several inches every single day, the soft organs inside have to go somewhere. They shift up or down, pressing against each other in ways they're not designed to handle. Your stomach gets squashed and pushed upward against your lungs. Your liver gets compressed. Your intestines coil into tighter spaces. Over time, your lower ribs actually begin to deform, the ends being pushed inward by constant pressure. The most immediate effect is on your breathing. You can't take deep breaths. You can only breathe shallowly, using the top portion of your lungs. This means your body is constantly getting less oxygen than it wants. You feel slightly lightheaded most of the time. Physical exertion leaves you genuinely breathless. Climbing those 4 flights of stairs to your room makes you pant like you've run a mile. Your lips sometimes take on a slightly bluish tint because your blood isn't being properly oxygenated. Your digestion is a disaster. The compression of your stomach and intestines means food moves through your system slowly and with difficulty. You're constantly mildly nauseous. After the rare occasions when you eat a normal-sized meal, you feel genuinely unwell as your compressed organs try to process food they don't have room to handle properly. Many models suffer from chronic constipation because their intestines are literally being squeezed too tightly to function efficiently. This is spectacularly uncomfortable but difficult to discuss or treat because Victorian sensibilities don't allow for frank conversations about digestive complaints. The pressure on your stomach also causes acid to push upward, creating a burning sensation in your chest and throat. This happens especially when you bend forward, which forces everything to compress even more. You learn to move carefully, avoiding positions that make the burning worse. You sleep propped up on pillows because lying flat makes the acid rise into your throat and leaves you coughing and uncomfortable. Your circulation is severely restricted by the tight lacing. The corset doesn't just compress your waist, it also restricts the blood vessels in the area. Your extremities don't get proper circulation. Your hands and feet are cold all the time, not just because the buildings are cold, but because not enough warm blood is reaching them. You develop chilblains on your fingers and toes, itchy swollen patches that hurt and sometimes crack open. Your legs ache constantly, partly from standing all day, but also because the blood isn't flowing properly. Fainting is common. Between the restricted breathing, the poor circulation, and the lack of food, your body sometimes just gives up and shuts down briefly. You'll be standing there during a photo shoot, and suddenly the room starts to swim. Black spots appear in your vision. Your hearing goes muffled and distant. If you're lucky, you can sit down quickly before you faint. If you're unlucky, you just drop where you stand. You wake up moments later on the floor with people clustered around you, looking annoyed that you've disrupted the session. Nobody calls a doctor. Fainting is so common among corseted women that it's barely worth commenting on. You're given some water, allowed to rest for a few minutes, then expected to get up and continue working. Your posture is affected by the constant corseting. The rigid garment provides so much external support that your own back muscles don't have to work as hard. Over time, these muscles weaken from disuse. When you remove your corset at night, your back aches terribly because your weakened muscles suddenly have to support your spine on their own. You develop a dependence on the corset, needing its support to stand upright comfortably, which means you end up wearing it even longer hours, which weakens your muscles further. It's a vicious cycle. Your skin suffers terribly. The edges of the corset rub against your body for 16 hours a day. Despite the layers of fabric between the corset and your skin, friction is inevitable. You develop raw patches at your waist, under your arms, and around your ribs where the boning digs in. These patches are red and tender, sometimes weeping moisture, sometimes scabbing over. They never fully heal because you put the corset back on every morning and irritate them all over again. You try various remedies, rubbing tallow or lanolin on the worst spots, but nothing really helps as long as you keep corseting. The constant compression also causes outbreaks of spots and rashes across your torso. Your skin can't breathe properly under all those layers. Sweat and natural oils get trapped against your skin. Your pores become blocked and inflamed. You develop crops of painful spots across your back and chest. Some of these become infected, turning into angry red lumps that hurt when the corset presses against them. But you can't stop wearing the corset, so they just remain chronic and miserable. Your feet are perhaps in the worst condition of any body part. Those tight, fashionable boots are destroying them systematically. You have permanent blisters at every pressure point, the backs of your heels, the sides of your small toes, the tops of your instep where the laces pull tight. Some of these blisters never heal, remaining as raw spots that make every step painful. Your toenails become deformed from constant pressure, growing thick and discolored. Some toenails just give up and fall off entirely. Your feet are covered in calluses and rough patches where your skin has tried to protect itself by growing thicker. The unnatural position forced on your feet by those narrow, pointed boots causes your toes to curl and overlap. Your feet are literally deforming to fit the shape of your footwear. Over years of wearing these boots, some models develop permanent foot deformities. Their toes stay curved and overlapped even when barefoot. Walking normally becomes difficult. The pain becomes constant background noise. You have a persistent cough that never quite goes away. The combination of restricted breathing, chemical fumes in the photography studios, and the generally sooty air of Victorian streets means your lungs are constantly irritated. You cough frequently, little dry coughs that don't bring up anything but won't stop. Your chest feels tight and uncomfortable. Sometimes you cough so much your already restricted breathing becomes even more laboured, and you genuinely panic that you can't get enough air. Headaches are your constant companion. The tight corseting restricts circulation to your brain. The lack of food means low blood sugar. The chemical fumes in studios irritate your sinuses. The strain of holding uncomfortable poses for long periods creates muscle tension in your neck and shoulders. All of these combine to give you near constant headaches that range from dull and annoying to sharp and debilitating. You've tried various remedies, most of which don't work. You just endure the pain because you have no other choice. Your menstrual cycle is irregular at best, often stopping entirely. The combination of poor nutrition and physical stress makes your body decide that reproduction isn't a safe option right now. From a health perspective, this might be your body's wisest decision. But the absence of your cycle also means something is seriously wrong with your overall health. Your body is so stressed and undernourished that it can't maintain normal functions. Let's discuss the social aspect of being a Victorian fashion model, which is more complicated and isolating than you might expect. Your position in society is ambiguous and uncomfortable. You're not quite respectable and not quite scandalous. You exist in an awkward middle ground that leaves you without a clear social circle. Respectable middle-class women view you with suspicion. You work in a profession that involves displaying your body, albeit clothed for money. You associate with artists and photographers who are considered bohemian and potentially immoral. You're unmarried and living independently, which respectable women find questionable. They don't openly insult you, but they also don't invite you to their social gatherings. You're excluded from tea parties and church socials and all the normal social activities that might make city life less lonely. When you encounter these respectable women on the street or in shops, they look through you rather than at you. If you attempt to make polite conversation, they respond with chilly brevity and find excuses to move away. You're tainted by your profession in ways you can't overcome. It doesn't matter that you're not doing anything actually scandalous. The perception is enough. Working class women don't quite accept you either. You're trying to maintain a fashionable appearance, which requires spending money on clothes and grooming that working class women can't afford and don't understand. You don't work in a factory or a shop or domestic service like they do. Your job seems easy and frivolous to them. You stand around wearing nice clothes while they scrub floors and haul laundry and work genuinely exhausting physical jobs. They think you're putting on airs, trying to be better than you are. The other women in your boarding house mostly ignore you. You work different hours than they do, coming and going on a schedule that doesn't match theirs. When you pass them in the hallway or on the stairs, you exchange brief nods but rarely conversation. Everyone is too tired and too focused on their own survival to build friendships. The boarding house is a collection of isolated individuals who happen to sleep in the same building, not a community. The people you work with aren't really friends either. The photographers view you as a necessary tool for their craft, no more meaningful than their cameras or chemical baths. They're polite in a distant, professional way, but they're not interested in you as a person. You're interchangeable with any other model of approximately the right size and colouring. When you're not working, they don't think about you at all. The dressmakers are similarly professional and distant. You're a body they drape fabric on. They care about how their clothes look, not about the person wearing them. The assistants who help dress you handle you efficiently and without warmth, like you're a large doll that needs positioning. Other models could potentially be friends, but there's too much competition for that. You're all competing for the same limited work. A photographer who hires another model is a photographer who didn't hire you. You can't afford to be generous or friendly when someone else's success might mean you can't pay rent. So you're polite to other models when you encounter them at fittings or studios, but you're not friends. You're rivals. There are a handful of other models you see regularly. You recognize their faces, you know their names, but your conversations never go beyond surface pleasantries. Everyone is guarding their professional contacts and opportunities. Nobody wants to share information about which photographers are hiring or which dressmakers pay promptly. Every model keeps her professional network private, protecting her sources of income from potential competition. You spend most of your free time alone. When you're not working, you're in your small room by yourself. You have no one to talk to about your day, no one to complain to about difficult photographers or uncomfortable corsets, no one to laugh with about the absurdities of the profession. You just sit in your dim room, resting your exhausted body, existing in silence. Loneliness becomes a constant weight. Humans are social creatures and you're living an essentially solitary life. You go days sometimes without having a real conversation with anyone. All your interactions are professional and transactional. People tell you where to stand, how to pose, when to come back for another fitting. Nobody asks how you are or what you think about anything. You can't write letters home because admitting what you do for work would shock your family, if you have family. Maybe you've told them you work as a shop assistant or a seamstress, something respectable and ordinary. You certainly haven't told them you're a fashion model, displaying clothes for photographers and artists in studios. That would sound far too close to the kind of work that respectable people don't discuss. You can't afford entertainment that might bring you into contact with other people in social settings. Theatre tickets are too expensive. Concerts are beyond your budget. Even a simple meal at a tea shop costs money you need for rent. Your entertainment consists of walking around the city on your rare free afternoons, looking at things you can't afford to buy, watching other people live lives that seem fuller and happier than yours. Sometimes you're so hungry for human connection that you linger in shops, pretending to consider purchases you have no intention of making, just to have a reason to talk to the shop assistant. You stretch out these interactions, asking unnecessary questions, commenting on the weather, hoping for a few moments of normal human conversation. The shop assistants are usually polite, but clearly want you to either buy something or leave. Eventually you leave, feeling foolish for trying. The isolation affects your mood profoundly. You become low-spirited and melancholic. Everything feels grey and flat. You have no energy for anything beyond the basic requirements of survival. Get up, get dressed, go to work, come home, sleep. The days blend together in a monotonous cycle. Nothing changes, nothing improves. You're just existing, not really living. You develop a habit of talking to yourself in your room, just to hear a human voice, even if it's your own. You narrate your actions out loud. You have conversations with yourself, asking and answering questions. You know this is odd behavior, but you do it anyway, because the silence is oppressive. You become hypersensitive to the small moments of human contact that do occur. When the woman down the hall helps button your dress, the brief touch of her fingers on your back feels significant. When a photographer thanks you for your work, the small courtesy makes your eyes prickle with unexpected emotion. You're so starved for positive human interaction that the tiniest crumbs feel like a feast. You fantasize about having friends, about being part of a social circle, about belonging somewhere. You imagine conversations you might have, outings you might take, the feeling of being known and liked by other people. But these fantasies don't go anywhere. There's no clear path from your isolated reality to the connected life you imagine. So you just continue as you are, alone in a city full of people, lonely in a boarding house full of residents. Sometimes you see groups of women walking together, laughing and talking, clearly comfortable with each other. You feel a sharp pang of envy mixed with sadness. That easy companionship seems impossibly distant from your reality. You can't imagine how to achieve it. You don't even know where to start. The loneliness is perhaps worse than the physical discomforts of the job. The corset and the hunger and the aching feet are all terrible, but they're straightforward physical problems. The loneliness is a deeper hurt, an emptiness that nothing seems to fill. You're isolated not just physically in your small room, but emotionally and socially in a way that makes everything else harder to bear. Now, let's talk about what happens when you get older as a Victorian fashion model, which is when the already difficult situation becomes truly desperate. The profession has a very short lifespan. By the time you reach your late 20s, you're already considered past your prime. By 30, you're essentially unemployable in this field. Fashion models are expected to represent youth and beauty. The clients want to see their garments displayed on young, fresh faces. They want the illusion that buying these clothes will make the purchaser look youthful and vibrant. A model in her 30s, no matter how elegant or professional, doesn't sell that illusion. The photographers and dressmakers start looking past you toward younger women who've just entered the profession. The work starts drying up gradually. A photographer who used to hire you regularly mentions he's trying some new models, bringing in fresh faces. A dressmaker who relied on you for fittings starts using someone else, someone younger with a smaller waist, who fits the fashionable ideal more perfectly. Each lost client means less income. Each month you're earning a little less than the month before. You try to compete with the younger models. You lace your corset even tighter, ignoring the pain and the fact that your already damaged body can't handle additional compression. You eat even less, trying to maintain the tiny waist that's becoming harder to achieve as your body ages and tries to settle into a more adult shape. You spend more money on your appearance, buying better clothes and grooming products you can't really afford, trying to look as fresh and youthful as possible. But you can't actually stop aging. Tiny lines are appearing around your eyes and mouth. Your skin is losing the flawless smoothness of youth, showing the damage of years of poor nutrition and harsh lighting and chemical exposure. Your face looks tired because you are tired, exhausted from years of this profession. The youthful glow that photographers want is simply gone, replaced by the reality of a hard life wearing you down. The younger models have advantages you can't overcome. Their skin is genuinely flawless without needing powder to cover imperfections. Their bodies bounce back quickly from the physical demands because they haven't been doing this for years yet. They're enthusiastic and grateful for work, willing to tolerate anything because it's all new to them. You, on the other hand, are grimly enduring a job you've been doing too long. That difference shows in photographs. Your body is also starting to fail in ways that directly impact your ability to work. Those years of tight lacing have left your back genuinely damaged. You have chronic pain that makes standing for long periods increasingly difficult. Your feet are so deformed and damaged that every step hurts. You have digestive problems that leave you feeling unwell much of the time. You're exhausted in a deep, permanent way that sleep doesn't fix. You're still in your 20s, but your body feels much older. The financial pressure becomes intense. You're earning less, but your expenses haven't decreased. Rent still needs paying. Food, such as it is, still costs money. Clothes still need maintaining and replacing. You start falling behind on rent, explaining to the landlady that payment will be late this week. You promise you'll have it soon. She's not sympathetic. She's heard these excuses from dozens of tenants before. She threatens eviction more frequently. You start taking jobs you would have refused earlier. Work that pays less. Positions that are less prestigious. Anything to keep some money coming in. You model for medical illustrations, standing in awkward positions while an artist sketches your corseted figure for a medical text about proper posture. You model for advertisements, for products you can't afford to buy yourself. You pose for amateur photographers who can't pay much but at least pay something. Some of these jobs edge into territory that makes you uncomfortable. Photographers who want you to wear less clothing than is entirely proper. Artists who want poses that seem more suggestive than strictly professional. You need the money desperately, so you accept work you might have refused when you had more options. But you also know that accepting this work damages your reputation, making respectable jobs even less likely to come your way. You look around for alternative employment, trying to figure out what else you could do. But you've spent years developing a very specific skill set that doesn't transfer well to other work. You can stand still for long periods while wearing uncomfortable clothing. That's not a qualification for any other job. You have no experience in shops or offices. You have no training in any trade. You're essentially qualified only for the profession that no longer wants you. Domestic service is one option, but it would mean an enormous step down in independence and status. You'd be living in someone else's house, working long hours for low pay, completely at the mercy of your employers. The work would be physically demanding in different ways, hauling water and scrubbing floors and carrying heavy loads up and down stairs all day. After years of damage to your body, you're not sure you could manage such physical labor. You could try becoming a seamstress, but you'd need more training than you currently have. The simple mending and repairs you do for yourself aren't the same as professional dressmaking. You'd need to find someone willing to take you on and teach you. And why would they when there are younger women available who could learn the trade and work for more years? You could attempt to find a husband, which would solve the financial problem if you could manage it. But you're getting older by Victorian standards. Men looking for wives generally want younger women. Your damaged health would also be a mark against you. You'd make a poor prospect as a wife, unable to bear children reliably due to your irregular cycles and generally weakened condition. And what would you tell a potential husband about your profession? The truth would shock most respectable men. As your situation grows more desperate, you start selling your possessions. The better dresses go first, sold second-hand for a fraction of what they cost. Then accessories, jewelry, anything with resale value. Your room becomes increasingly bare as you trade your belongings for rent money. Eventually, you have nothing left to sell except the clothes you're currently wearing and the absolute minimum possessions needed for survival. You fall behind on rent despite your best efforts. The landlady gives you a final warning. Pay what you owe by the end of the week or get out. You have no way to raise the money. You've sold everything. You've taken every job offered. There simply isn't enough income to cover your expenses anymore. Eviction becomes reality. The landlady has her son carry your few remaining possessions down to the street and deposit them on the pavement. You stand there beside your pathetic pile of belongings, genuinely unsure what to do next. You have nowhere to go, no family to take you in, no friends to provide temporary shelter, no savings to rent another room even if you could find a landlady willing to take a tenant who's just been evicted. You try staying with other models, asking if you could sleep on their floor just temporarily while you figure something out. Most refuse. They're barely managing their own situations and can't take on the burden of another person. One woman lets you stay for 3 nights, then asks you to leave. Her landlady doesn't allow extra occupants, and she can't risk eviction herself. You end up in progressively worse lodgings, places that rent beds by the night in rooms shared with multiple other women, places where theft is common and safety is questionable, places that smell of unwashed bodies and damp rot. You're still trying to work, still trying to present yourself professionally at the few jobs you can get, but it's increasingly difficult when you don't have a stable place to store your clothes or wash properly. Let's discuss the sheer boredom of being a Victorian fashion model, which is something nobody warns you about when you enter the profession. You'd think a job involving beautiful clothes and artistic photography would be interesting, but the reality is mind-numbingly tedious. Most of your working hours are spent waiting around doing absolutely nothing while other people prepare things at their own leisurely pace. You arrive at the photography studio at the appointed time, which means you've dragged yourself out of bed early, climbed down 4 flights of stairs, navigated the filthy streets, and arrived ready to work. Then you wait. The photographer isn't ready yet. He's fussing with his equipment, mixing chemicals, adjusting his camera setup. This takes approximately forever. You stand there in the cold studio, arms wrapped around yourself for warmth, watching him potter about, checking things that apparently need checking. An hour passes. You're still waiting. Your feet hurt from standing in one spot. You're hungry because you didn't eat breakfast. You're cold because the studio's always cold. But mainly, you're just bored out of your mind. There's nothing to look at except blank walls and photography equipment. There's nothing to do except stand there. You can't even sit down properly because your corset and the elaborate dress you're wearing make sitting uncomfortable and might wrinkle the fabric. Finally, the photographer is ready. He positions you carefully, which takes another 20 minutes of adjustment. Then you hold still for 3 minutes while he takes one photograph. Then he needs to change the photographic plate and prepare for the next shot. This takes another 30 minutes. So you wait again, still standing, still bored, still uncomfortable. The ratio of actual work to waiting around is approximately 1 minute of posing to 30 minutes of standing there like a piece of furniture, while the photographer does technical things you don't understand. Some photographers are chatty and will talk while they work, which at least provides some distraction, but most are silent and focused, leaving you alone with your thoughts for hours. Your thoughts are not particularly interesting after the first hour. You think about your aching feet. You think about food. You think about how much longer this session might last. You think about nothing at all because there's nothing to think about. Your mind goes blank from sheer tedium. The dressmaker's shop is even worse for boredom. Fittings require you to stand motionless while the dressmaker works, but unlike photography where you at least get brief breaks between shots, at fittings you just stand continuously for hours. The dressmaker circles you, pinning and adjusting while you stare at the wall. You can't read because you need to stand still. You can't do handwork because your arms need to be available for positioning. You just stand there, a living dress form, while your mind slowly dissolves from lack of stimulation. You try counting things to pass the time. You count the pins in the pincushion. You count the buttons on the garment rack. You count the floorboards you can see. You count backwards from 100, then forward again, then backwards in multiples of 3. Anything to give your brain something to do besides scream with boredom. Sometimes you make up stories in your head about the other people in the room. The dressmaker's assistant with a serious face becomes a secret duchess in disguise. The photographer's apprentice is actually a detective investigating a mysterious crime. These fantasies become elaborate over hours of standing still with nothing else to occupy your mind. You create entire backstories and plot developments, playing them out silently, while your face maintains the neutral expression required for work. You develop a habit of examining every tiny detail of your surroundings just to have something to focus on. You notice the crack in the plaster on the far wall. You study its shape until you've memorized every branch and split. You notice a stain on the ceiling that looks vaguely like a horse if you squint. You examine this stain from every angle your head position allows, deciding whether it's more like a horse or perhaps a large dog, or maybe just a meaningless blob. The clock becomes your enemy and your only friend. You watch the hands move with agonizing slowness. Surely 5 minutes have passed. You look at the clock. 2 minutes have passed. time moves differently when you're bored and uncomfortable. Minutes stretch out like hours. An afternoon session that's scheduled for 3 hours feels like 3 days. You watch that clock hand creep around the dial and will it to move faster. It doesn't. Your mind starts playing tricks on you from the boredom and restriction. You become convinced the clock has stopped. You stare at it, waiting to see the minute hand move, starting to panic that time has actually frozen. Then it ticks forward 1 minute, and you're flooded with relief. Time is still moving. Eventually this will end. You just have to wait. Sometimes the boredom becomes so intense it's almost painful. Your brain is screaming for stimulation, for something to do, for anything to happen, but nothing happens. You just stand there in silence while the photographer changes plates for the 17th time, or the dressmaker pins and repins the same seam, trying to get it exactly right. You can't even zone out completely because you need to remain responsive to instructions. The photographer might suddenly tell you to adjust your hand position. The dressmaker might ask you to turn slightly. So you have to maintain a state of alert boredom, ready to respond but having nothing to respond to most of the time. It's exhausting in a strange way, this constant low-level attention to nothing much. On particularly slow days, you start having conversations with yourself inside your head. Not just idle thoughts, but actual conversations, asking yourself questions and answering them, debating meaningless topics, anything to create some mental activity. You discuss with yourself whether the stain on the ceiling looks more like a horse facing left or a horse facing right. You present arguments for both positions. You reach a conclusion, then immediately begin arguing the opposite position. You're so bored you're literally arguing with yourself for entertainment. The boredom makes you sleepy despite the physical discomfort. Your eyelids get heavy. You catch yourself starting to drift off while standing upright. This is dangerous, because if you actually fall asleep, you'll probably fall over, which would be both embarrassing and potentially damaging to the expensive dress you're wearing. You force your eyes wide open and try to focus on something, anything, to stay awake. But there's nothing stimulating to focus on, so your eyes start drooping again within minutes. Sometimes you're so desperate for something interesting to happen that you almost welcome minor disasters. When the photographer drops a bottle of chemicals and has to spend 20 minutes cleaning it up, you're grateful for the distraction. When another model arrives for her session and you can watch her being positioned and photographed, it's the highlight of your day. Watching someone else do the same boring job you do becomes entertainment, because at least it's something different from staring at walls. The walk between appointments becomes precious because at least you're moving and seeing different things. The filthy streets with their piles of manure and puddles of questionable liquid are more interesting than the inside of the studio, because things are happening. People are walking past, carriages are rolling by, street vendors are shouting about their wares. It's stimulation, and you're so starved for mental activity that even this chaotic, smelly, unpleasant environment feels almost pleasant compared to standing motionless indoors for hours. Let's talk about the specific photographers you work with, because they're a collection of difficult personalities who make your already unpleasant job even worse. Each one has his own quirks and demands, and you have to adapt to all of them if you want to keep getting hired. There's the photographer who's obsessed with absolute perfection in every tiny detail. He spends 45 minutes positioning your hand, adjusting each finger individually, stepping back to look, coming forward to adjust again. He moves your thumb a quarter inch to the left, then back to the right, then to the left again but slightly less. He's genuinely unable to make decisions, constantly second-guessing himself, changing his mind every few minutes. A simple portrait session that should take 2 hours takes 5 hours because he can't settle on anything. Your arm goes completely numb from being held in position, while he dithers about whether your hand should be slightly higher or slightly lower. Then there's the photographer who shouts constantly, "Everything is a crisis. The light isn't right, and this is a disaster. You've moved a fraction of an inch and you've ruined everything." His assistant mixed the chemicals wrong and now the whole session is destroyed. He storms around the studio bellowing about incompetence while you stand frozen in position, trying not to flinch every time he yells. The shouting makes you tense, and the tension makes you shake slightly, which makes him shout more about how you're moving. It's a miserable cycle. Another photographer barely speaks at all. He positions you without explanation, grunts if something needs adjustment, and otherwise ignores your presence completely. You're not a person to him. You're an object that happens to be shaped like a person. He'll adjust your position by physically moving you without warning, grabbing your shoulder and turning you, lifting your chin with his hand, positioning your arms like you're a large doll. His hands are always cold and slightly damp. The unexpected touch makes your skin crawl, but you can't react because that would be unprofessional. There's one photographer who talks constantly about his artistic vision. He explains at length what emotion he's trying to capture, what message the photograph should convey, how important this work is to the advancement of photographic art. He seems to think you're deeply interested in his theories about light and composition. You're not. You're interested in getting through the session and getting paid. But you have to stand there nodding politely while he rambles on about art and beauty and truth, when all you're thinking about is how much your feet hurt. The elderly photographer with shaking hands is particularly difficult to work with. His trembling makes the technical process take even longer than usual. He fumbles with equipment, drops things, has to start procedures over when his shaking hands ruin his work. You feel sorry for him because he's clearly struggling with age and infirmity, but you also resent the extra time his difficulties add to your sessions. What should take 3 hours takes 6 because he has to attempt everything multiple times. One photographer has his studio in a building that smells overwhelmingly of the fish market below it. The reek of old fish pervades everything. It soaks into your clothes and hair during sessions. You smell like fish for the rest of the day after working there. The photographer himself seems not to notice the stench, having become accustomed to it over years. But you notice it intensely every moment you're there, breathing shallowly through your mouth and trying not to gag. There's a photographer who insists on working in near darkness because it supposedly creates better lighting effects. His studio is dim as a cave. You can barely see where you're putting your feet. You've tripped over equipment multiple times because you simply couldn't see it in the gloom. Standing perfectly still is even harder when you can't see clearly to orient yourself. You feel dizzy and disoriented in that dark space, never quite sure which direction you're facing. Another photographer is obsessed with classical poses copied from ancient statues. He has books of Greek and Roman sculptures that he constantly references, trying to make you replicate poses designed for marble, not human flesh. These poses are spectacularly uncomfortable. Your arms are supposed to extend in ways that make your shoulders scream. Your head is supposed to tilt at an angle that makes your neck muscles burn. You're meant to stand on one foot with the other delicately pointed, which is essentially torture after the first 30 seconds. He doesn't care that you're in pain. The classical sculpture wasn't in pain, so neither should you be, according to his logic. One photographer has a small yappy dog that's present during all sessions. This creature barks constantly at nothing. It runs around your feet while you're trying to hold still. It occasionally tries to chew on the hem of your dress. The photographer thinks the dog is delightful and makes excuses for its behavior. You think the dog is a menace and wish it would be locked in another room. But you can't say that without offending the photographer. so you just endure the constant yapping and the periodic attacks on your clothing. There's a photographer who's always eating during sessions. He takes bites of bread or cheese between exposures, chewing loudly while you stand there hungry. The smell of food makes your empty stomach cramp with want. You watch him eat while you're forbidden to eat to maintain your tiny waist. He's completely oblivious to how cruel this is. He's just having his lunch at his convenience, not thinking about the starving model watching every bite. Another photographer is perpetually late. He schedules your session for 9 in the morning, so you arrive at 9. He arrives at 10:30, completely unapologetic about wasting 90 minutes of your time. You've been standing around in the cold studio waiting, getting hungrier and more tired, while he was presumably sleeping comfortably or having a leisurely breakfast. He expects you to be ready to work immediately upon his arrival, never mind that you're already exhausted from waiting. One photographer has a studio on the 5th floor of a building with narrow, steep stairs. Getting there in your elaborate dress and tight boots is genuinely dangerous. The stairs are worn and slippery. You have to hold onto the railing carefully and climb slowly, trying not to trip on your hem or lose your balance. By the time you reach the 5th floor, you're breathless and shaking. Then you have to stand perfectly still for hours while barely able to breathe from the climb and the corseting combined. There's a photographer who pays slowly and sometimes not at all. He always has excuses. He hasn't received payment from his client yet. He's waiting for a bank transfer. He's had unexpected expenses. Could you possibly wait another week for your fee? You can't really refuse because you need to maintain the professional relationship, so you agree to wait, again, even though you need that money now for rent and food. Sometimes you have to ask 3 or 4 times before you finally receive payment, and by then he's acting like you're being unreasonable for expecting to be paid for work you did. Another photographer makes inappropriate comments about your appearance. Nothing quite scandalous enough that you can formally object, but uncomfortable remarks about your figure, your face, how the tight clothing displays your shape. He leers slightly while positioning you. His hands linger a bit too long when adjusting your posture. You feel grimy after sessions with him, like you need to wash not just your body but something deeper that his attention has somehow soiled. But he pays reliably and hires you regularly, so you tolerate the discomfort because you need the income. Let's discuss the actual clothing you have to wear for these photographic sessions, because the garments are even more torturous than your regular wardrobe. Fashion photography requires clothes that are at the absolute extreme of what's stylish, pushed to ridiculous levels for visual impact. That means maximum restriction, maximum discomfort, maximum absurdity. The sleeves on some of these dresses are so tight you can barely bend your arms. They're cut to fit like a second skin from shoulder to wrist, with no ease for movement built in. Getting your arms into these sleeves requires assistance and determination. The seamstress or photographer's assistant has to literally pull the fabric over your arm while you push your hand through, working the tight sleeve up inch by inch. Once on, the sleeves restrict circulation to your hands. Your fingers tingle and go slightly numb. Moving your arms requires effort against the resistant fabric. Raising your arms above your head is impossible without splitting the seams. Some bodices are boned so heavily they're essentially armor. There are steel or whalebone stays every inch around the circumference. The fabric between the boning is pulled drum tight. Wearing one of these feels like being strapped to a board. You can't bend at the waist even slightly. You can't twist your torso. You can only move from the hips down and the shoulders up. Everything in between is rigid. Your back aches from the enforced perfect posture. There's no slouching, no relaxing, no comfortable position possible. The collars on fashionable dresses come up so high they force your chin up and restrict your neck movement. Some have boning in them too, creating a rigid circle around your throat. You can't look down without bending at the waist, which you often can't do anyway because of the rigid bodice. You can't turn your head fully to either side. The collar chafes against your jaw and throat, rubbing the skin raw over hours of wear. By the end of a session, you have red marks circling your neck like someone tried to strangle you with expensive fabric. The weight of some garments is staggering. Heavy silk, multiple layers, elaborate trim all add up. One dress might weigh 20 pounds or more. Wearing it feels like carrying a small person on your body. The weight pulls on your shoulders and back. Standing upright requires constant muscular effort against the drag of all that heavy fabric. After hours of this, your whole back is one solid ache. Winter clothes are particularly brutal. Heavy wool dresses lined with more fabric, fur trim adding bulk and weight, multiple petticoats underneath because fashion demands a full skirt, regardless of practicality. You overheat quickly under all these layers. Sweat runs down your back and pools under your arms, but you can't remove any layers because this is the outfit required for the photograph. So you slowly cook inside your woolen prison while trying to look elegant and composed. Summer dresses seem like they should be better, but they're not. Fashion demands long sleeves and high necks and multiple petticoats year-round. The light-coloured fabrics fashionable for summer show every spot of moisture, so you can't afford to sweat even though you're wearing heavy layers in hot weather. You stand in the stuffy studio trying desperately not to perspire while dressed like it's winter. Damp patches appear on the fabric despite your best efforts. The photographer gets annoyed about having to wait while the dress dries, or having to retouch the photographs to hide the moisture stains. Some dresses have trains that drag behind for several feet. These constantly get stepped on by you or by other people moving around the studio. When someone steps on your train while you're moving forward, you're jerked backward abruptly. It's like someone pulling your emergency brake. You stumble, trying to catch your balance, hoping you don't fall. The train also collects every bit of dirt and dust from the studio floor. By the end of a session, the trailing fabric is filthy and probably damaged. You're expected to be careful with these expensive garments, but how are you supposed to protect a train that's deliberately designed to drag on the ground? Evening dress for photographs is particularly ridiculous. Extremely low necklines leave your shoulders and upper chest bare. This wouldn't be so bad except the studios are freezing. You stand there with goosebumps covering your exposed skin, shivering, while the photographer takes his time with technical preparations. Your bare skin is clammy and cold. Your muscles are tight and tense from the chill. But evening dress is supposed to look elegant and comfortable, so you have to pretend you're not freezing while your teeth want to chatter. The fabrics themselves are often scratchy and irritating. Heavy brocades, stiff with metallic thread that scrape against your skin. Silk that's been treated with chemicals to make it hold its shape, leaving it rough and unpleasant to touch. Velvet that sheds fibers constantly, leaving you covered in coloured fuzz. Net overlay that catches on everything and pokes through to scratch your arms. Lace with rough edges that leave red marks wherever it contacts your skin. These aren't clothes designed to be comfortable. They're designed to look impressive in photographs, regardless of how they feel to wear. Some garments have decorative elements that actively harm you. Beading that's sharp enough to cut if you brush against it wrong. Jet ornaments heavy enough to pull on the fabric and drag at your neck or waist. Metal buckles that heat up under the photography lights and burn your skin. Artificial flowers with wire stems that poke through the fabric to stab you. You're essentially wearing decorative torture devices while trying to look serene. The combination of the corset underneath and the restrictive dress over it sometimes becomes unbearable. You're compressed from both directions. The corset squeezes from inside, the tight dress restricts from outside. There's almost no room for your body to exist. You feel like you're being pressed between two boards. Breathing becomes a genuine challenge. You gasp little sips of air, never able to fill your lungs, constantly feeling like you're suffocating very slowly. Changing between outfits during a session is exhausting. You can't just slip out of one dress and into another. Each garment requires assistance to remove and replace. Buttons must be unfastened one by one. Laces must be untied. Hooks must be unhooked. Then the whole process happens in reverse with the new garment. A costume change takes at least 20 minutes, during which you're being undressed and redressed like a large child. The photographer taps his foot impatiently, annoyed at the delay. You're trying to cooperate while being yanked and pulled and fastened into new restraints. Some sessions require multiple costume changes. You might wear 4 or 5 different outfits in one day. Each one is uncomfortable in its own special way. Each one requires adjustment and settling time before you can move naturally. By the 5th dress of the day, you're so exhausted and sore that you're close to tears. Your body is covered in red marks and sore spots from all the different pressure points. You're dizzy from restricted breathing. You just want to put on a loose nightgown and lie down, but there are still more photographs to take. Occasionally a garment actually breaks while you're wearing it. Seams split from the strain of your breathing against the tight fabric. Buttons pop off and ping across the room. Laces snap under tension. When this happens, there's usually blame directed at you. Were you breathing too deeply? Did you move wrong? Never mind that the garment was sewn too tightly for any human to wear safely. It's your fault for having a body that needs to breathe and move. Now let's talk about the various illnesses and infections you're constantly dealing with as a Victorian fashion model. Because your compromised body catches every ailment that passes through the city. Your immune system is as weak as the rest of you, exhausted from malnutrition and stress and the constant physical punishment of your profession. You catch colds constantly. Your nose runs perpetually from autumn through spring. You cough and sneeze your way through photographic sessions, trying to stifle the sounds so you don't ruin the silent concentration required. But stifling sneezes while corseted is genuinely painful. The need to sneeze, combined with the inability to fully expand your ribcage, creates a sharp pain in your compressed chest. You sneeze anyway, small strangled sounds, then immediately have to resettle into position and hold still again, while your nose streams and your eyes water. The colds settle into your chest because your lungs can't expand properly to clear themselves. You develop a rattling cough that persists for weeks. Each cough shakes your whole compressed torso, sending pain through your restricted ribs. At night, you lie in bed coughing until your abdominal muscles ache and your throat is raw. The woman in the next room bangs on the wall and shouts at you to be quiet. You try to muffle your coughing in your pillow, but that makes it harder to breathe and triggers more coughing. It's miserable. Headaches plague you constantly. Some are from the corseting and poor circulation. Others are from sinus congestion that never quite clears. Your head feels stuffed with wool, heavy and aching. The pressure behind your eyes makes it painful to look at bright lights. But photography studios have bright lights by necessity, so you squint through the pain while trying to keep your eyes open for the camera. You get infections in your throat that make swallowing painful. Your tonsils swell up like angry lumps on either side. Drinking even water hurts. Eating is agony, though you're barely eating anyway, so at least there's that. Your voice becomes hoarse and rough. Photographers complain that you sound ill, like that's something you can control. You whisper your responses to instructions, trying to save your damaged throat. Stomach complaints are frequent. Something you ate, or possibly the nothing you ate, leaves you with cramps and nausea. You feel queasy and unstable, never quite sure if you're going to be sick. During sessions, you swallow repeatedly, fighting down the urge to retch. Cold sweat breaks out on your forehead. You breathe carefully through your nose, trying to settle your rebellious stomach. The corset compression makes the nausea worse, squeezing your stomach when it most wants to be left alone. Your monthly courses, when they come at all, are miserable. The cramping pain combines with the corset compression to create intense discomfort. You feel like your insides are being wrung out, while simultaneously being crushed in a vice. You're dizzy and weak from the restricted flow. But you can't take time off for something like this. It's not considered a valid reason to miss work, so you bind yourself with rags and hope nothing leaks through to stain the expensive dresses, and you carry on working while your body protests violently. Rashes appear on your skin regularly, sometimes from the constant friction of clothing, sometimes from allergic reactions to the harsh soaps and chemicals you encounter, sometimes from infections spreading on skin that's constantly damp with trapped sweat. These rashes itch intensely. You want to scratch until you bleed, but scratching where people can see would be improper, and scratching under your clothes is impossible when you're dressed in multiple layers you can't reach through. So you just endure the maddening itch while trying to hold still for photographs. Your hands develop chilblains every winter. The poor circulation from corseting combines with the cold studios and cold streets to create swollen, itchy, painful patches on your fingers. They itch and burn simultaneously. When they crack open, the splits are agonizing. Ordinary tasks like buttoning your dress or holding a prop become painful. The chilblains turn your fingers red and purple, making your hands look diseased. Photographers complain that your hands look unsightly and position you to hide them in photographs. Mouth infections are common. Your teeth are rotting and your gums bleed easily. Sometimes an infection develops around a bad tooth, creating a painful abscess. Your jaw swells and throbs. The pain radiates through your whole face. Eating becomes impossible, though at least that helps maintain your tiny waist. The infection makes you feverish and weak. Your breath smells foul from the rot in your mouth. You're aware of the smell and deeply embarrassed, but there's no money for a dentist and no time to heal, even if you could afford treatment. Ear infections strike occasionally, leaving you partially deaf and dizzy. The world sounds muffled and distant. Your balance is affected, making it difficult to stand still during photographic sessions. The room seems to tilt and swim. You focus on a fixed point and pray you don't fall over. The infection causes a deep, aching pain in your ear that nothing seems to relieve. It radiates down your neck and into your jaw. You press your hand against your ear during breaks, trying to ease the pressure, but it doesn't help much. Your eyes become infected from the constant exposure to chemical fumes in studios. They turn red and weepy. Thick discharge crusts your lashes shut in the mornings. You have to soak your eyes with water to get them open. Your vision is blurry and everything looks slightly wrong. The light sensitivity from the infection makes photography sessions torture. The bright lights feel like knives stabbing into your inflamed eyes. You squint and flinch, ruining shots, while the photographer grows increasingly annoyed. Skin infections develop on the pressure points where your clothing rubs constantly. The raw patches under your arms and around your waist don't get a chance to heal. They become infected, turning hot and angry and swollen. The infection sometimes spreads, creating larger areas of painful inflamed skin. When you remove your corset at night, you can see the infected patches clearly, red and oozing clear fluid. You dab at them with a cloth and whatever cheap ointment you can afford, but they don't improve while you continue wearing the corset every day. You develop a persistent fungal infection between your toes from the constantly damp environment inside your boots. Your feet never dry out properly. The skin becomes white and wrinkled and starts to peel away in soggy strips. The affected areas itch terribly and smell musty and unpleasant. You wash your feet as well as you can with your limited water, but the infection persists. It spreads slowly to other toes, claiming new territory on your already miserable feet. Various aches and pains become infected spots. You bump your shin on something and develop a bruise. The bruise becomes infected somehow and turns into a painful lump. You have a cut on your hand that won't heal properly. It becomes infected and swells up, making your whole hand throb. These small infections are constant, your body's inability to heal properly, meaning every minor injury becomes a bigger problem. Your lungs develop a chronic infection that the doctor calls bronchitis. The coughing becomes productive, bringing up thick matter from your lungs. Each coughing fit exhausts you. Your ribs ache from the constant muscular effort of coughing against the corset's restriction. You're breathless even when not coughing. The infection makes you feverish at night. You wake up soaked in sweat, shivering as the damp nightgown cools against your skin. Let's discuss the economic reality of being a Victorian fashion model, because the money situation is even worse than you might imagine. The profession sounds like it should pay reasonably well. After all, you're working with expensive clothes and professional photographers. Surely that means decent wages. It doesn't. A typical modelling session pays perhaps 3 shillings. That sounds like actual money until you consider what things cost. Your room at the boarding house costs 5 shillings a week, so 2 sessions worth of work just covers your housing. Food, minimal as it is, costs another few shillings weekly. Coal for heat in winter, candles for light, soap for washing, repairs to your clothing. All these necessities eat through your earnings before you've bought a single unnecessary item. You need to work at least 3 sessions per week, just to break even on basic survival costs. 4 or 5 sessions per week if you want to have anything left over for emergencies or replacing worn-out necessities. But the work isn't steady. Some weeks you get 5 sessions, other weeks you get 1. There's no guaranteed income, no regular schedule. You take whatever work is offered whenever it's offered, and hope it adds up to enough. The photographers don't pay immediately either. They pay when they receive payment from their clients, which might be weeks or months after your session. You do work in January, and might not see wages until March. This delay makes budgeting impossible. You're constantly trying to guess when payment will arrive, and stretching your minimal resources to cover the gap. You fall behind on rent regularly, always promising the landlady that money is coming soon, hoping she doesn't evict you before it arrives. Some photographers are more reliable payers than others. You track this carefully in your head. The photographer who pays within a week becomes your preferred client, even if his sessions are more unpleasant than others. Reliable payment matters more than comfortable working conditions when you're constantly on the edge of destitution. The photographer who takes months to pay only gets your time when you have no other options. Occasionally photographers dispute the amount owed. They claim the agreed rate was lower than what you remember. They deduct money for supposed problems with your work. One photographer refused to pay you at all because he claimed you moved during an exposure and ruined his photographic plate. You know you didn't move, but he had the power and the money, and you had neither. You lost a full day's wages to his false accusation, and there was nothing you could do about it. The dressmakers pay even less than photographers. A fitting might earn you 1 or 2 shillings for several hours of work. They argue that fittings are less demanding than photography, so they should pay less. Never mind that you're standing just as long and the work is just as uncomfortable. They pay what they want and you accept it, because some income is better than none. You have virtually no bargaining power. If you try to negotiate higher rates, there are 10 other hungry models willing to work for the low wages offered. The clients know this. They know you're desperate. They use that desperation against you, keeping rates as low as possible because they can. Speaking up about unfair pay just means you stop getting hired, so you accept whatever is offered and keep your mouth shut about the inadequacy of the wages. Expenses constantly eat into your earnings. You need to maintain your appearance to stay employable, and that costs money. Hair washing and styling takes time and products you have to purchase. Your clothes need regular cleaning and repair. You need boots that look presentable even if they hurt your feet. These aren't optional expenses, they're requirements for continuing to work. But they mean that even when you earn money, much of it immediately goes back out for work-related costs. Transportation between jobs costs money. If a photographer's studio is far from the dressmaker's shop where your next appointment is, you might need to take an omnibus rather than walk. That costs pennies you can barely afford. But walking would take too long and make you late for your next job. So you pay for transport and watch your already small earnings shrink further. You can't save money. Every penny you earn is needed immediately for current survival. There's nothing left over to put aside for future emergencies or slow periods. You're living hand to mouth, earning just barely enough to survive this week with no buffer for next week's problems. This means any disruption, any unexpected expense becomes a crisis. When you get sick and can't work for a week, that's a week with no income. Your expenses don't pause while you're ill. Rent is still due. Food still needs buying. You fall into debt immediately, borrowing from anyone willing to lend, promising to repay when you can work again. The debt accumulates faster than you can repay it. You're constantly juggling who to pay this week and who to put off until next week, when hopefully you'll have more work. Some models turn to taking loans from predatory lenders who target desperate women. These lenders charge outrageous interest rates. You borrow 5 shillings and end up owing 8 shillings within a month. The debt grows faster than you can possibly earn. Women get trapped in debt cycles they can never escape, working constantly but never getting ahead, because most of their earnings go to repaying loans with massive interest. You've borrowed from your landlady a few times when rent was due and you hadn't been paid yet. She charges interest too. Nothing outrageous like the street lenders, but enough to make the borrowed amount grow into more than you borrowed. Every time you borrow from her, you're aware that you're digging yourself deeper into a hole. But what choice do you have? Get evicted or borrow and hope you can repay before the interest accumulates too much? You've pawned items when desperate for immediate cash. The few pieces of jewellery you owned went to the pawn shop months ago. You got a fraction of what they were worth. You never earned enough to redeem them before the time limit expired. Now they're gone permanently, sold by the pawnbroker, and you have nothing to show for them except a few weeks of managed rent payments months ago. Your work clothes are your most valuable possessions. If you became desperate enough, you could pawn your better dresses. But without presentable clothes, you can't work. So you hold on to them even when you're behind on rent, even when you're hungry, because they're your tools for earning. Pawning them would be like a carpenter pawning his saw. It would provide immediate money, but eliminate future earning ability. Food is where you cut costs when money is short, which is always. You eat less and lower quality. Instead of bread and cheese, just bread. Instead of tea and bread, just tea. Eventually just water, and whatever you can afford that day. Your body is constantly underfed, not just for fashion, but because you genuinely can't afford adequate food. The fashion requirements and the economic reality align to keep you starving. You see other women your age who work as shop assistants or domestic servants. They probably earn similar amounts to you, but their work is steady. They know what they'll earn each week. They're not waiting months for payment. They're not constantly scrambling for the next job. The predictability of their income, even if the amount is small, gives them a stability you lack. You'd probably be better off economically as a servant, but you've been a model too long. Going into service would feel like admitting failure. So you persist in this economically precarious profession. You fantasize about having enough money, not wealth, just enough. Enough to pay rent on time every week. Enough to buy adequate food. Enough to have a small cushion for emergencies. This modest dream seems impossibly distant. You can't imagine how you'd ever accumulate enough to feel secure. Your earnings barely cover current needs with nothing left over for building towards security. Let's talk about the absolute lack of safety measures in the Victorian photography studio. Because the chemicals and processes used are genuinely dangerous, and nobody seems particularly concerned about protecting you from them. The photography chemicals that produce those elegant images are toxic, caustic, and handled with shocking casualness. The developer solution that photographers use to process their plates contains substances that make your skin tingle and burn if you accidentally get splashed. This happens more often than you'd like. Photographers work quickly, pouring and mixing chemicals without much care for what might splash onto nearby surfaces or people. You've had developer solution hit your hands and arms multiple times. It stings on contact and leaves red marks that last for days. The fixing solution smells strongly of something sharp and chemical. Breathing the fumes makes your nose and throat burn. Your eyes water when you're in a room where fixing solution is being used. The photographers seem immune to it, or perhaps they've just damaged their sense of smell so thoroughly they don't notice anymore. But you notice. Every breath in these chemical-filled rooms feels like it's stripping something from the inside of your nose and throat. The collodion that's used for wet plate photography is particularly nasty. It's made with ether and alcohol and other substances that produce fumes which make you lightheaded and dizzy. Standing near a photographer who's coating plates with collodion makes the room swim around you. Your head feels floaty and strange. Your balance becomes uncertain. This combines badly with the corseting and lack of food to make you genuinely worried you'll faint. Some days you do faint, and everyone acts annoyed that you've disrupted the session rather than concerned that you've been overcome by toxic fumes. Silver nitrate solution stains everything it touches brown or black. This includes your skin if you're unlucky enough to be splashed. The stains don't wash off. They just have to wear off gradually over weeks. You've had brown-stained hands from silver nitrate accidents that made you look like you'd been digging in filth. The stains are embarrassing and impossible to explain. People assume you're dirty or diseased when really you've just been splashed with photography chemicals. Nobody provides protective equipment. There are no gloves, no aprons for models who might be standing near chemical processes. No ventilation to remove dangerous fumes. You just stand there breathing toxic air and hoping you don't get splashed with something that will burn or stain your skin. The photographers sometimes wear aprons to protect their clothes, but they're protecting fabric, not health. Nobody's thinking about protecting the people in the room. The glass plates that photographers use are sharp when broken. Plates get broken regularly because they're fragile, and the photographers handle dozens of them during sessions. Broken glass goes into a bin in the corner of the studio, but shards often miss the bin and end up on the floor. You've stepped on broken glass fragments that pierce through the thin soles of your boots. The resulting cuts on your feet add to your collection of pains and injuries. Nobody sweeps up the glass promptly. It just accumulates until someone eventually gets around to cleaning, usually after multiple people have been cut. The photography lights are dangerous too. They're open flames, oil lamps, or gas lights burning brightly to provide illumination. These are positioned near you during sessions. You can feel the heat from them on your skin. If you moved wrong or stumbled, you could easily fall into a light and be burned. The photographers sometimes adjust lights while they're burning, moving hot metal fixtures with their bare hands and occasionally swearing when they burn themselves. These burning lights are just part of the environment, accepted hazards that everyone works around without protection or particular caution. The developing room where photographers process their plates is even worse than the main studio. It's small and poorly ventilated, filled with concentrated chemical fumes. Sometimes you have to wait in or near the developing room while the photographer processes plates between exposures. The concentrated fumes make your head pound and your stomach turn. You feel genuinely ill within minutes of being in that chemical fog. But there's nowhere else to wait, so you stand in the developing room doorway, breathing toxic air and trying not to be sick. Some photographers use mercury in their processes. Mercury vapor is odorless, so you don't even know you're breathing it. But it accumulates in your body over time, causing tremors, confusion, and personality changes. You've noticed some photographers who've worked with these processes for years have shaking hands and seem oddly irritable and confused. You're probably being exposed to during sessions, breathing mercury vapor without knowing it, accumulating poison that will affect you later in ways you won't connect to these exposures. The acids used in certain photographic processes are stored casually on shelves where they could easily be knocked over. You've seen bottles of acid sitting in precarious positions, waiting to be upset by a careless elbow or a stumble. If one of these bottles broke and spilled on you, the acid would burn your skin severely. But nobody seems concerned about this possibility. The acids just sit there, unlabeled or poorly labeled, treated like they're no more dangerous than water. Pyrogallic acid used in some developers causes headaches and nausea even from brief exposure. Extended exposure can cause more serious problems with your kidneys and liver. You're exposed regularly, breathing the fumes during long photographic sessions, your body absorbing these poisons while you stand motionless, trying to look elegant. Nobody mentions that these chemicals are harmful. You only know because you feel ill after sessions involving certain processes. The darkroom is disorienting and dangerous in its own way. It's completely dark except for a single red or orange lamp that provides just enough light for the photographer to see what he's doing. You've had to enter the darkroom occasionally to wait or to be positioned for certain types of photographs. In that dim coloured light, you can't see properly. You stumble over equipment, you bump into tables and shelves. The photographer yells at you for being clumsy, but how are you supposed to navigate in near total darkness while wearing a corset and long skirts and tight boots? Chemical burns on your skin are treated casually. If you complain about burning or stinging from chemical exposure, you might get told to rinse with water. That's the extent of the treatment. No salves, no bandaging, no concern about whether the burn might become infected. Just rinse it and carry on. The assumption is that minor chemical burns are part of the job, not something that requires actual medical attention or prevention. Your exposure to these chemicals is chronic. You're in these studios multiple times a week, breathing fumes, risking splashes, absorbing poisons. The effects are cumulative. Each exposure adds to the previous ones, building up a body burden of toxic substances that will cause problems eventually, even if they're not causing obvious problems right now. But you need the work, so you keep returning to these chemical-filled rooms and hoping the damage won't be too severe too quickly. Some models develop chronic respiratory problems from the fume exposure. They cough constantly and struggle to breathe even when not corseted. Their lungs have been damaged by months or years of inhaling toxic vapors. You're probably developing the same problems. Your lungs already struggle from the corseting. Adding toxic fume exposure on top of that is destroying your respiratory system gradually but thoroughly. Let's discuss the seasonal variations in your work as a Victorian fashion model, because the job is miserable year-round, but miserable in different ways depending on what time of year it is. Each season brings its own special variety of suffering. Winter is brutally cold. The photography studios are unheated, except for maybe a small fire in one corner that does nothing to warm the large drafty space. You stand in evening dress with bare shoulders for hours while your skin turns blue with cold. Your muscles are so tense from shivering that holding still becomes even harder. Your teeth want to chatter. You clench your jaw to prevent it, giving yourself a headache from the sustained muscle tension. Your exposed skin is covered in goosebumps that probably show in the photographs, but nobody seems to care. The walk between appointments in winter is torment. Your fashionable clothes aren't designed for warmth, they're designed for appearance. You have a thin cloak that does almost nothing against the bitter wind. Your hands, in their thin decorative gloves, go numb within minutes of being outside. Your feet are frozen in those narrow boots that provide no insulation. The wind cuts through all your layers like they're not there. You arrive at each appointment shivering violently, and it takes 20 minutes to stop shaking enough to pose properly. Your room is freezing in winter. You can't afford enough coal to heat it properly. You huddle in bed under every blanket you own, still cold, sleeping poorly because your body can't fully relax when it's that cold. You wake up stiff and aching from tensed muscles and the cold itself. Getting out of bed requires forcing yourself to leave the only warm spot and expose yourself to air cold enough that you can see your breath. Washing in winter is torture. The water in your basin has a skin of ice. You have to break the ice before you can wash. Splashing icy water on your skin makes you gasp. You wash quickly, the minimum necessary, because prolonged exposure to freezing water is unbearable. You're never properly clean in winter, because thorough washing would require more cold water exposure than you can tolerate. So you stay slightly grimy, adding that discomfort to all the others. Spring brings rain, endless rain, turning the streets into rivers of mud. Your long skirts drag through the mud and become soaked and heavy. The wet fabric clings to your legs and chafes your skin with every step. Your boots leak because they're worn and the leather has cracked. Your feet are constantly damp, cold and wrinkled. The dampness creates perfect conditions for fungal infections, which duly appear between your toes and under your toenails. The rain soaks through your thin cloak within minutes. You arrive at appointments wet through multiple layers. Your chemise is damp against your skin. Your hair is wet and dripping down your back. The damp clothes have to stay on because you don't have replacements. So you stand there for hours in wet clothing that's making you colder as the moisture evaporates slowly, pulling heat from your body. You develop a rattling cough that persists through the entire spring season. The increased humidity of spring makes your corset feel even more restrictive. The damp air is thick and hard to breathe. Your already limited lung capacity struggles with the heavy wet air. You're constantly short of breath, gasping slightly, never quite getting enough air into your compressed lungs. The exertion of just existing in a corseted state while breathing humid air exhausts you. Spring means flowers and trees releasing pollen that makes your nose run and your eyes itch and swell. You're constantly sniffling and wiping at your streaming eyes. The photographers complain that your eyes are red and your nose is swollen. They act like you're doing this deliberately to annoy them. You can't help your body's reaction to pollen, but they don't care about your allergies. They care that you look puffy and tired in photographs. Summer brings its own hell. The heat in the city is oppressive. The buildings trap hot air and radiate it back. There's no breeze in the narrow streets. The air is thick with coal smoke and dust and smells of rot and horse manure baking in the sun. Breathing this hot, filthy air is like inhaling soup. You're constantly slightly nauseated from the smells and the heat. The studios become ovens in summer. The large windows let in bright light, which is good for photography, but also let in heat that has nowhere to go. You stand in these sweltering rooms wearing multiple layers of heavy fabric. Sweat runs down your body in streams. It soaks your chemise. It pools under your arms and beneath your compressed chest. It drips down your back. Your face becomes shiny with perspiration that you're not allowed to wipe away during exposures. The sweat shows on your clothes. Dark patches appear under your arms and down your back. The photographers get annoyed about the visible sweat ruining the photographs. They make you wait while the dress dries, or they position you to hide the sweat stains. But you can't stop sweating. Your body is desperately trying to cool itself, and sweat is its only mechanism. Trapping all that moisture against your skin in multiple layers means you're essentially steaming yourself like a vegetable. The heat makes the smells worse. The photography chemicals smell stronger in summer. The odor of sweating bodies intensifies. Your own body smell becomes noticeable despite your efforts to stay clean. The studios reek of sweat and chemicals and heat. You feel grimy and disgusting all the time. You want to bathe constantly, but you only get one bath per week, so you just remain sweaty and smelly between baths. Summer nights in your fourth-floor room are unbearable. Heat rises, so all the accumulated heat from the whole building collects in your space. The air is motionless and hot enough that breathing feels like work. You lie on top of your covers wearing as little as decency allows, sweating into your sheets. Sleep is nearly impossible. You drift in and out of consciousness, too hot to properly rest, waking up exhausted because you've barely slept. The heat makes your feet swell inside your tight boots. The swelling makes the boots even more painful than usual. Your feet are squeezed and aching and sweating in the leather that provides no ventilation. When you finally remove your boots at the end of the day, your feet are wrinkled and white and smell terrible from being trapped in damp leather all day. The relief of removing the boots is intense but brief, before the aching from compressed, swollen feet takes over. Autumn brings temperature swings that make dressing appropriately impossible. Morning is cold, afternoon is warm, evening is cold again. You dress for the morning cold and then suffer through the warm afternoon, or you dress lightly and freeze in the morning and evening. There's no right choice. You're either too hot or too cold most of the day, rarely comfortable. Autumn also brings the return of frequent illness. The changing temperature and shorter days seem to trigger colds and coughs. Everyone in the city is sniffling and coughing. You catch whatever is going around because your weakened body has no resistance. You spend autumn in a perpetual state of fighting off one illness, or recovering from it, just in time to catch the next one. The earlier darkness of autumn means travelling to and from appointments in dim light or darkness. The streets are dangerous at night. You walk quickly, nervously, aware that bad things happen to women alone in the dark. You've been followed occasionally by men with unclear intentions. You've been harassed and propositioned. The fear adds another layer of misery to your commute. You're not just cold and tired, you're also frightened. Finally, let's talk about what a typical complete day looks like when you string all these miseries together. Because understanding each individual hardship is one thing, but comprehending how they combine into an entire day of sustained suffering really drives home why you wouldn't last as a Victorian fashion model. You wake at dawn because you need time to prepare yourself before your first appointment. You're already tired because you slept poorly. The room was too cold or too hot. Your corset damage made your back ache all night. You were hungry. The neighbours were noisy. Or all of these combined. You lie in bed for a moment, gathering the courage to start another day. Your body hurts before you've even moved. Your feet throb from yesterday's damage. Your ribs ache from corseting. Your stomach is hollow with hunger. You drag yourself out of bed and splash icy water on your face from the basin. The cold shocks you awake. You perform minimal washing because thorough cleaning takes water you don't have and time you can't spare. You're slightly grimy as you begin dressing. The chemise goes on first, scratchy against your skin. Then you lace yourself into your corset, pulling it as tight as you can manage alone, which isn't as tight as it needs to be. You'll have to ask the woman down the hall to tighten it further before you leave. The petticoats go on one by one, each layer adding weight. Your arms are tired just from getting dressed. The dress comes next, requiring awkward contortions to fasten what buttons you can reach. The ones up your back will have to wait for assistance. You pull on your boots, forcing swollen feet into leather that's too tight, lacing them with fingers that are clumsy from early morning stiffness. Each eyelet is a small struggle. By the time your boots are laced, your fingers ache. You knock on your neighbour's door. She's barely awake herself, but she helps you tighten your corset and button your dress. Her fingers are rough and cold. She pulls the laces brutally tight, compressing your waist until you gasp. She fastens the 40 small buttons up your back without gentleness or conversation. The whole interaction takes 5 minutes of uncomfortable intimacy with someone who isn't your friend. You thank her. She grunts. You both know you'll repeat this tomorrow. Now you're fully dressed and it's 7 in the morning. Your first appointment isn't until 9. You have 2 hours to get there even though the journey only takes 40 minutes. But you need to account for slow progress in your restrictive clothing, potential street obstacles, and the possibility of getting lost or delayed. Better to arrive early and wait than to arrive late and lose the job. You descend the 4 flights of stairs carefully, one hand on the railing. Your tight boots make each step precarious. Your long skirts threaten to trip you. You emerge onto the street into whatever weather is happening. Rain, cold, heat, wind. Whatever it is, your clothing isn't adequate for it. You're either going to freeze or roast during this journey. The streets are already busy with morning traffic. You navigate between piles of horse droppings and puddles of things you don't examine too closely. Your hem drags through filth immediately. Carriages splash past, throwing up mud. You dodge and weave, trying to protect your dress, failing. Within 10 minutes, your skirts are filthy, and you're only halfway there. You arrive at the studio 40 minutes later, exhausted from the walk. You're shown to a small room where you wait. 9 o'clock comes and goes. The photographer isn't ready. You stand in the cold room, hungry and uncomfortable, watching the clock. Finally, at 9:30, the photographer calls you in. He positions you for the first shot, adjusting and readjusting your pose for 20 minutes. Then you hold perfectly still for 3 minutes while he takes the photograph. Then you wait 30 minutes while he prepares the next plate. This cycle repeats for 3 hours. Brief moments of posing interrupted by long periods of waiting. Your feet scream in the tight boots. Your back aches from the rigid posture. Your compressed stomach cramps with hunger. Your head throbs from restricted breathing. But you hold still, stay pleasant, follow instructions, because this is the job. At noon, the photographer dismisses you. You've completed one session. You have another appointment across town at 1 o'clock. No time for food, even if you allowed yourself to eat. You navigate back through the disgusting streets, moving as quickly as your restrictive clothing allows. You arrive at the dressmaker's shop at 1 o'clock exactly, climb the stairs, and immediately begin the next ordeal. The dressmaker needs you for a fitting that lasts 2 hours. 2 hours of standing motionless on a platform while she pins and adjusts fabric directly on your body. You get stabbed multiple times. Your legs tremble from fatigue. The close room is stuffy and smells of sweat and fabric sizing. You feel faint but force yourself to stay conscious because fainting would mean no payment and possible loss of future work. At 3 o'clock, the fitting ends. You have a photography session at 4 at yet another location. You have 1 hour to cross the city. You walk quickly despite exhaustion and hunger and pain. Your feet are covered in blisters that break and reform and break again with each step. You taste metal in your mouth, either from the lead makeup earlier or from your gums being damaged by malnutrition. Your vision is slightly sparkly from hunger and restricted oxygen. You reach the next studio and immediately begin another 3-hour photography session. More positioning, more waiting, more standing still until your body screams for movement. The photographer is the one who shouts constantly. His yelling makes you flinch, which ruins shots, which makes him yell more. By the end of this session, you're close to tears from pain and fatigue and verbal abuse. But crying would make your face red and swollen, so you hold the tears in and let them burn behind your eyes. At 7 o'clock, you're finally released. You've been working since 9 this morning with no food and no break. You're dizzy with hunger and exhaustion. The walk home takes forever because you're moving so slowly. Your feet can barely carry you. Each step is agony. You're limping, obviously, but nobody stops to help. People just flow around you on the busy street like you're an obstacle. You finally reach your building and face those 4 flights of stairs. They look impossible. You climb them anyway because you have no choice. 1 step at a time, resting on each landing, pulling yourself up by the railing. You reach your floor after what feels like hours. You unlock your door and stumble into your room. You collapse into the chair. You're too tired to even begin the process of undressing. You sit there in the dim room, still fully corseted, still wearing your filthy dress, too exhausted to move. Eventually you force yourself up to light a candle. In the flickering light you can see how wrecked you are. Your face is pale and drawn. Your hair is coming out of its pins. Your dress is stained and dirty. You struggle out of your clothes, removing each layer with trembling hands. The corset finally comes off, and you gasp with relief as your organs shift back toward their normal positions. The relief is so intense it almost hurts. You can breathe properly for the first time in 12 hours. The deep breaths make you dizzy. You lean against the wall until the room stops spinning. You perform minimal washing at your basin. The water is cold, but you're too tired to care. You wipe the worst of the grime off your face and hands. You'll deal with the rest tomorrow, or maybe the day after. You're too exhausted for thorough washing. You pull on your nightgown, the only comfortable garment you own.